霧が深いな。リンクのやつ無事だといいんだが。
The Silent Hill series is one of the most influential in the survival horror genre. While it shares a lot of DNA with the other greats like Resident Evil or Dead Space, it carved out a very specific niche for itself. Its gameplay mechanics are relatively minimalistic, and its horror is deeply psychological. There's really nothing else quite like it. The series had a great run starting in 1999 and lasting through 2012 with Silent Hill Downpour. 8 games, a few missteps along the way, but ultimately one of survival horror's defining franchises. And then the series went quiet. Silent Hill became something of the past, a series that is deeply respected, but left to live on through memory and nostalgia. Over a decade after the release of Downpour, we saw some movement again with Bloober Teams' remake of the horror masterpiece Silent Hill 2, and that game was absolutely fantastic. But as good as it was, revisiting one of the genre's most iconic works isn't the same thing as moving a series forward. Meanwhile, the other giant of the genre, Resident Evil, for better or for worse, continued to iterate, always remaining part of the conversation. Alongside it, games like Dead Space and Alan Wake, The Evil Within, and others continued to interpret and reshape survival horror in their own way. All of these games left their mark. All of them helped define modern horror. But there has been a large Silent Hill-shaped hole in the genre for some time that no other game has quite managed to fill. Until now, with the first brand new Silent Hill entry since 2012, Silent Hill F. Silent Hill F represents the boldest reimagining the series has ever attempted. Rather than returning to familiar ground, it deliberately steps away from nearly every defining icon the franchise is known for. The game is set in rural Japan during the 1960s with no direct connection to the town of its namesake or its iconic characters. The only thing left is the classic fog. Even structurally, Silent Hill F departs from tradition, introducing notable shifts in pacing, progression, and combat philosophy. Which raises an important question, not just about this game, but about the future of the series itself. Is Silent Hill F doomed to live in the shadow of its predecessors, or is it signaling a new direction for what Silent Hill can be? The clearest sense of that direction comes from the story itself. You play as Hinako, a teenage girl and the black sheep of her family, living under the oppression of an abusive, alcoholic father and a largely complacent mother, while simultaneously struggling with the pressures of young womanhood in Japan during the 1960s. Her older sister Junko is always supportive of Hinako, but also very much the model daughter. Shu is Hinako's complicatedly platonic best friend since childhood. Sakuko is a warm and lovable presence, though a bit odd. And Rinko is a longtime friend who secretly harbors jealousy toward the bond between Shu and Hinako. After a particularly heated encounter with her father, Hinako storms out to meet her friends in town, and that's when the trademark Silent Hill fog rolls in. The group of friends then try to escape the town as it sinks deeper into a monster-filled hellscape. This game stays true to the horror style familiar to Silent Hill, where the horror is founded deep in the psychology of the game's characters, and the world itself symbolizes the protagonist's deepest felt traumas. The story is a very slow burn, told through Hinako's experiences in the real world trying to escape the town with her friends, and a dream state in which a mysterious foxman guides her through a dark temple. What I've always appreciated about Silent Hill as a series is how deeply it commits to psychological horror. These games aren't afraid to dive into topics that other franchises often shy away from, frequently dark, uncomfortable, and often outright taboo. Silent Hill F is no exception here. Early on, you're given the emotional context surrounding Hinako and the people in her life. On its own, that framework is serious and meaningful, but not necessarily horrific. What makes it so dark is how the narrative refuses to let those ideas rest. It keeps digging and digging and digging until what comes up becomes genuinely disturbing. The game even opens with a pretty heavy content warning. And while it might be easy to dismiss it as overly cautious or legal cover, the intensity of the content isn't being oversold here. Sometimes it's abstract rather than explicit, but it's all there. Silent Hill F is a heavy experience, and several parts of it have stuck with me. But I could talk all day about the story and its themes. I really eat this stuff up. But let's step back and talk about the writer a bit. The story of Silent Hill F was written by Ryukishi07, a name Konami was very intentional about highlighting in early trailers and promotional material. And that stood out to me. Not because of the star power or some long-standing connection to the franchise, but because Ryukishi07 is neither of those things. He's a relatively niche Japanese horror writer with a devoted cult following, best known for his visual novel series called When They Cry. Bringing Ryukishi07 as the core narrative voice behind Silent Hill F was a bold decision for a couple of reasons. First, he had no prior involvement with the Silent Hill series, which meant honoring its legacy while still filtering it through his own distinct style, a tall order for any writer. Also, bringing in Ryukishi07 and placing his name so prominently on the project is unusual for the franchise, and it signals a more intentionally authored approach to storytelling. And the gamble paid off. He honestly killed it. The writing brought a distinct voice to the series without ever losing sight of what made Silent Hill resonate in the first place. Even with the substantial departure from Silent Hill's traditional setting, it turns out the combat system has been the most controversial aspect of Silent Hill F. A lot of discussion around the game seems to circle back to it, often quite critically. Personally, I'm a bit mixed on it. Silent Hill has never been praised for its combat. Like most traditional survival horror games, encounters were less about mechanical precision and more about limited resources, with panic and desperation leading you to waste ammo. The tension came from that loop rather than from clean and crisp fights. Silent Hill F takes a different approach. For starters, there are no guns at all. Combat is entirely melee with light, medium, and heavy weapons. Instead of ammo, weapons have limited durability, forcing you to either repair them with consumable toolkits or ultimately replace them. Stamina also plays a central role. It limits how often you can run, attack, or dodge, and it runs out quickly. If you're doing too much, you'll be punished. However, hitting a perfect dodge causes a little slow-mo sequence and recovers your stamina to full. This, combined with the ability to parry certain enemy attacks, makes the combat take on a more duel-like rhythm. On top of that is the sanity meter. Certain enemy attacks and environmental effects drain it, and once it hits 0, you start taking repeated damage. The twist is that sanity can also be spent intentionally. By using it, you can enter a focused state that allows you to charge stronger attacks or extend counter windows. It's another resource that has to be managed, protected for survival, but strategically spent in combat. Now, this combat system is often criticized for being clunky or cumbersome, and outside of some smaller issues, like a finicky lock-on system or camera trouble in tighter spaces, I actually disagree with most of these surface-level complaints. Yes, the combat is clunky, but you're playing as a teenage girl fighting monsters with a rusted pipe. It's supposed to feel that way. It reinforces vulnerability. And yes, there is more to keep track of, like harsh stamina limits, sanity, perfect dodges, and counters. The combat is more demanding, but if you slow down and engage with the systems instead of fighting against them, it can be tense and surprisingly satisfying. The boss encounters in particular do a great job of showcasing this, both mechanically and thematically. Where things start to fall apart isn't in the design of the combat itself, but in how little room the game gives it to evolve. The game has a very small pool of enemy types, many of which are only minor variations of one another. Because of that, the process of learning attack patterns plateaus fairly early. Before long, you've seen almost everything the combat system has to offer. By the later hours, encounters start to feel less tense and more repetitive, and I sometimes found myself just running past enemies rather than engaging with them. With more enemy variety introduced gradually across chapters, the duel-like structure of the combat could have stayed engaging for much longer. New rhythms or even small puzzle twists in enemy design would have continuously demanded adaptation, giving these mechanics the space they were clearly built for. A similar pacing issue carries over into the progression systems. Spare items can be discarded at save points in exchange for a currency called Faith, which is used to upgrade your health, stamina, sanity, and Amamori slots. Amamori are passive perks that can be found or purchased and slotted in on a limited basis. On paper, this system complements the combat well. In practice, the game simply isn't long enough for it to fully shine. I played on hard combat and hard puzzles, explored thoroughly, and literally walked through areas to soak up the atmosphere, and still finished the game in roughly 14 hours. That isn't dramatically short, but it's short enough that it doesn't feel like the upgrade system has time to be felt. This is especially true for the Amamori system. There are plenty of intriguing options available to you here, but not enough time or enemy variety to meaningfully experiment or settle into a distinct playstyle. Of course, this system has more room to develop beyond a first playthrough, but that doesn't change how constrained it feels within the experience most players will actually have. Taken on their own, the combat and progression systems feel thoughtfully designed and full of potential. I like the direction they're pointing in, but they're ultimately being held back by pacing and repetition. The foundation is strong, the game just doesn't give these systems enough space to breathe. There are also some interesting ideas at play when it comes to the ending structure and the way Silent Hill F handles New Game Plus. And much like the combat system, I'm kinda mixed on it. Traditionally, games with multiple endings tie those outcomes to player behavior or decisions made in the story. In this game, your first playthrough ending is fixed. Alternate endings are only accessible through New Game Plus. But also, in-game dialogue changes, new areas and puzzles open up, and some bosses change. On paper, I actually like this idea quite a bit. You're not just replaying the game for a different finale, you're experiencing new context and layers of the story that simply don't exist the first time through. Where I struggle with it is how much the game withholds during that initial playthrough. The first ending is intentionally vague. As with most horror games, there are plenty of notes, environmental clues, and symbolism that help piece the story together. But even the most attentive player might reach the end and feel like they're not really sure what's been going on the whole time. It's only through subsequent playthroughs that significant context becomes available. Details that reframe earlier events and give clarity to the ending you've already seen. Structurally, that's fascinating. It turns the story into something that exists on this weird spectrum of playthroughs rather than a single curated experience. The issue for me is that this approach is simultaneously artistically sound and somewhat exclusionary. Players who don't typically replay games, who want to experience the story just once and move on, may walk away feeling a bit incomplete. And I suspect many of them will end up seeking clarity elsewhere, through YouTube essays and so on, rather than through the game itself. To be clear, this is not a knock on the story or even on that first ending. both of which are incredibly strong. It's just an unconventional philosophy that uses the first ending more like a setup than a complete narrative. And whether that works will depend on either your appetite for speculation of the vague or your willingness to engage with the game more than once. Silent Hill F is not perfect, but perfection has never been what made this franchise one of the most respected names in survival horror. What's always mattered more is Silent Hill's commitment to psychological horror, a precise and thoughtful structure that turns internal conflicts into something you have to navigate through the lens of the survival horror genre. While some of Silent Hill F's more ambitious systems don't always have the space they need to fully develop, the game delivers completely on that commitment. Its story is confident, heavy, and unapologetic in the themes it chooses to explore. Ryukishi 07's writing brings a distinctly personal, culturally grounded perspective to the series, but it never feels at odds with Silent Hill's identity, and blends seamlessly with the franchise's long-standing themes. It feels less like an outsider's take and more like a natural evolution of what Silent Hill has always been trying to do. This is a game that isn't afraid to be divisive. It takes risks with its structure, its combat, and its storytelling philosophy. And not all of those risks will land for everyone. But that confidence and willingness to move forward rather than retreat into nostalgia is exactly what Silent Hill needed. Silent Hill F isn't revisiting the past. It's testing the future of the franchise, while still honoring the legacy that made it matter in the first place. For me, it absolutely delivered as a modern standout within the survival horror scene, standing tall amongst its predecessors and the genre as a whole. Thank you for watching. If you enjoyed the video, please like and subscribe to support the channel. And until next time, cheers.